Joining me now to discuss the cuts, Heather McGhee, who is director of the Washington offices of DEMOS, a nonpartisan public policy research and advocacy organization. Thanks for being here, Heather.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, so when you were looking through these at 2 a.m. in the morning, I know you got up. What stuck out to you?
Really, the overarching lack of accountability for the #1 issue on most Americans' minds, which is jobs.
Right.
I mean, we know that cutting non-defense discretionary spending by this much is going to cost about 400,000 jobs. We know that, for example, cutting high-speed rail, $3 billion would have added 1 million jobs. There's just not the focus on what we know to be the most important issue in America right now, which is the unemployment crisis.
You've been in Washington for a few years, and you've watched this debate move in this direction. How would you characterize the step that we took on Friday in terms of where the conversation has moved from jobs and investment, which I think was the conversation in 2009 around the Recovery Act, to austerity and cuts, despite the fact we still have 9% unemployment, basically?
Absolutely. It is really an upside-down world down here. You have to remember that during the Great Depression, when FDR cut spending in 1937, we slid back into the Depression. You have to realize that the UK did the same thing, made major cuts last year that hurt pensioners and students and all that. Also, their GDP growth shrank by 2%. I mean, we are sort of ticking away from the major policy concerns of most Americans, which is getting our recovery back on track. And most importantly, Democrats are losing the message that it sort of supports their entire economic philosophy, which is that government actually has a role in helping build the middle class, helping stimulate our economy, and that nearly 10% unemployment is a crisis, and it's an outrage.
I noticed as I was going through it, there's $600 million for community health centers.
Nurses.
Nurses, right? There's this cut to FEMA first responders around $700 million. Do you think we're going to see, between now and Thursday, are we going to see negotiation on that? Are we going to see backlash? Are people going to fight those? Or
honestly, I'm a little bit concerned that there's actually going to be a little bit of a revolt from the right on this, as we see that some of the money that was said to be cut is actually not going to be real spending in terms of an actual decrease. That said, I mean, let's take one program, for example, a program that's being zeroed out. I think it's important to look at the programs that are being completely zeroed out, and this is the HUD housing counselors. Right? We've got 1 out of 4 Americans in this country who has a mortgage underwater. We've got nearly 5 million foreclosures anticipated by the end of the year. And these are the people who sit down with people who are struggling to pay their bills. These are not the foreclosure fraud, rescue scams. These are the private sector, in the most part, who are getting government contracts to help people figure out how to stay in their homes. That program is completely zeroed out.
Are we seeing here a kind of prophetic vision of what the austerity era will look like? I mean, because I think one of the things that happened, I was just talking to Congressman Joe Walsh, farm subsidies are not in here, right? Defense is not in here. The mortgage deduction was in Simpson Bowles, but it's not going to get. There seems to me like there's a tremendous distributional mismatch in terms of who gets their ox gored when.
Absolutely. Take one example. This whole exercise, right? It's about $38 billion. $34 billion was the amount that we could have just stopped this whole exercise by not doing the inheritance tax giveaway from the December tax deal. This is like the Paris Hilton giveaway, right? If we had not done that,
to be clear, that's just the top. That's a very small amount of estates, right? Have to pay that.
Absolutely.
The very richest, wealthiest.
Yeah, over $5 million.
Right.
Exactly. So if we had not done that in December, we wouldn't have had to make any of these cuts.
Heather McGhee of DEMOS, bringing the knowledge as always. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Chris.
it.